we have to look at the situation which is developing all the time regarding Crystal Palace. Article 5, FA Cup winners, Crystal Palace. Article 5 of UEFA's regulations for the Europa League deals with multi-club ownership. Amongst the rules, it quotes, no one may simultaneously be involved either directly or indirectly in any capacity whatsoever in the management, administration and or sporting performance of more than one club participating in a UEFA club competition. UEFA's rules set a deadline of March the 1st, 2025 to show proof of multi-club ownership restructuring, a deadline which Crystal Palace missed. Now, if you missed it, and I don't think there's anybody in this country that missed the interview last week when John Textor was in this very studio. John Textor, of course, had a considerable involvement with Crystal Palace until recently. But the same John Textor spoke, the man at the centre of all of this, spoke to Simon and myself and said live in talkSPORT, it dawned on him when the FA Cup was won at Wembley by Crystal Palace, the players came up to collect the trophy and he thought, now this could get interesting. This was Textor. But more recently, when the Crystal Palace captain lifted the FA Cup above his head and you're applauding, was a part of you thought, oh, God.
Oh, is what I thought. Am I allowed to say that?
Who said it?
God. Yeah, no, I did. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was so happy, but I felt the gravity to it. And I was concerned, of course.
On the same day?
Holding the cup next to the Prince. Yeah, it was a great, great moment. And I couldn't have been happier. I couldn't have been happier for the fans. But yeah, I was worried about what was coming. I'll admit to not even thinking about the issue. Of course, I have to. But I also read the rule. So please read the rule yourself. Like, everybody's talking about it like it's so obvious. The rule's very clear. If you have decisive influence, you may need to consider this. I don't. I didn't. If I had decisive influence, I wouldn't have been trying to sell the club starting in June of 2024.
So later on Friday, the news came through that yes, indeed, it was the news that Crystal Palace fans and people like Textor and the chairman Steve Parish were dreading, that they were dropping out of the Europa League and it was Europa Conference League football for them next season. Now, we'll get to Simon and Martin in a second, but over in the US, Steve Parish then gave his reaction to that news to Sky Sports.
Well, obviously, we're devastated. We're devastated for, most importantly, the supporters. And I think something the supporters of all clubs should be devastated for us, because this is the dream. You win a cup, actually win something for the first time in your history. And as somebody said to me, it's like winning the lottery and going to the counter and you don't get the prize. So I'm devastated for the players, for the fans, for the staff. And I think it's a bad day for football. I think most football fans, right-minded football fans, will see what an injustice, terrible injustice this is for the football club, and one that I ideally hope somebody can remedy, because I do believe that nobody in football wants to see this. Nobody in football, and I don't think UEFA want to see this. Clubs that rightfully qualify for a competition being locked out of that competition on the most ridiculous technicality that you could imagine.
Devastated, and it's a ridiculous technicality. In the Daily Mail on Saturday, Simon, Ian Ladyman, well-respected journalist, Crystal Palace's tumble from the Europa League before it has even started is a sporting catastrophe they should have seen coming. That they didn't is overwhelmingly on them. This, in essence, is the London club's own fault. Is that how you see it?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I assumed that they would have a credible position to advance to the UEFA panel that was going to adjudicate over the circumstances they found themselves in, which is why I pushed back originally and said this will find its level and Palace will find their way through it.
Well, it started, but you thought it was a non-story.
No, I never thought it was a non-story. What I thought
you did.
No, I didn't think it was a non-story.
You thought it would go nowhere.
No, I didn't think it was a non-story. What I thought the outcome would be that Palace would find their way through it, which is based upon the fact that I assumed that they would be credibly imbued with the right positioning. Now, if you've taken somebody into your business and bought and sold them shares, and you've got a rule that exists since 2010, which was reinforced and the parameters established very clearly in 2017 over the RB situation, I would have assumed that Parish and his cohorts would have been across the position clearly and understood their obligations. And to suggest that they don't, and whether people think it's because I've got an agenda against Parish, got nothing to do with that. The situation is that ironically, this is now a victimless crime, because Palace, the shareholder in question, has sold his shares. The teams that, whether if they play in a competition, will not have the challenges they've got there. But when you listen to Parish's interview, I mean, one of the questions that was asked of him by the Sky guy was, about decisive influence. The answer is categorically, unequivocally, no. Not, I have influence from my 8-year-old son, or influence from fans. If somebody asks you a question, does somebody have decisive influence, and you answer it, an 8-year-old has influence on me, it's a ridiculous answer. And then to suggest that you don't have the information because it goes into info at that's where all the Premier League communication goes. That's where the information goes, full stop. And then to talk about you're not a multi-club ownership, to keep on reinforcing that point. Well, the panel haven't accepted that. You haven't given them a credible enough position to accept it. So you've got to stop trotting that out. And you now got to look at the reality of what your options are. It is clearly, undeniably, whether people think there's an agenda behind this, the executive control of this football club has been well documented as being Steve Parish. He's the executive chairman. This is his responsibility. This rule has been in existence since 2010. It's been reinforced in 2017. It was reminded to all the Premier League clubs by the Premier League themselves, not just UEFA, as Palace was saying. UEFA, we don't have any communication with UEFA, we never have done. It came from the Premier League in October 2024. It was provided for in their accounts by their finance director, which was filed at the end of the year on the 31st of December, suggesting that they needed to be mindful of the changes of UEFA regulations. They have had dealings with Lyon. They have had dealings with the Belgium club that Textor owns. So the reality of it is, this is completely, whether you like it or not, it is completely Palace's own fault. They should have done their due diligence in terms of, if we're going to take Textor's money, right? He's got other clubs. He's gone and bought Lyon, right? He's got 43%, right? What do we need to do? Have we got council's advice in place to make sure that these rules that we know exist, by taking his money, putting it in our pockets as shareholders, and bankrolling the club through COVID, have we made ourselves a hostage to fortune? Which they have. Now you go to the rule and say, the fairness of this rule, it's a ridiculous rule. When Palace go into the Europa League next year, if they were playing in it, they'd be playing against Lyon. Textor wouldn't be a shareholder in Palace. So who is now going to be compromised? You're taking the present, and you're overlaying the past onto it.
So where's the ambivalence here? So where are you standing? And you're saying that this could be actually overthrown and that Crystal Palace could get in. Is that because first of all, are UEFA insisting because they missed the deadline, or is that because now at this minute, as we stand, Textor is no longer a part owner of Crystal Palace?
It's a bad deadline, isn't it? Because the only time you should really be conflicted is when when the competition is actually played. And if you've got influence in two camps at the time the competition is played, then ultimately the rule should be effective. Now they've changed the accountancy deadline from June the 1st to March the 31st. Deadline schmedline. Palace's shareholders don't exist in the same way, and the decisive influence, decisive control. I understand why the rules are there, because, and the ridiculousness of multi-club ownership is you either want it or you don't. Mm-hmm. They'll say we want it because if you've got it on different continents, it doesn't affect you. If you've got it in South America and in Europe, you're not going to play in competitive football very often.
Yeah, but when you set out, first of all, as owners of Crystal Palace, you're putting money in there, hoping at some stage or another that you actually might make this club successful. So you know the rule that there's a possibility if you have a joint ownership.
Their defence is two things. We didn't know the rule.
They didn't know the rule?
They didn't know the rule. Or more likely, they're suggesting they didn't know the rule deadline had changed till March the 1st. It's not true.
Yeah.
It's not true, they did.
Yeah.
Now, and it seems they didn't know of loopholes.
Well, the loopholes have always been there, which is putting things into blind trust. Textor himself, now, whether John contradicts himself a lot of the time in that interview, with due respect to him, he talked about the fact that he didn't know the rule. Mm-hmm. And then said, as soon as we lifted the cup, oh, damn. Mm-hmm. He said something different, right? So obviously he knew there was a concern there. So obviously there was a concern going on. As much as people might want to think this is an agenda being served out, this is on the executive control of Crystal Palace. And if the executive control of Crystal Palace is the executive chairman, which Parish tells everybody that he is, then it's on him. They took 130 million quid, give or take, from Textor to sell their shares. Mm-hmm. At that time, and with 2021, they should have been fully conversant with the. Now, it's not just the FA Cup, by the way. Palace could get into Europe through the League Cup. It's not beyond the wit of man to suggest a Premier League club that's been in the Premier League for 13 years can win the League Cup. Mm. So they should have had this prepared.
Right. And now as Ian Ladyman says in the Mail, Simon, Palace didn't do anything about it. They sat in their hands. They took a risk. We'll take a break. During that break, if you're a Palace fan who is totally disgusted or devastated, as Steve Parish is saying everybody is, who has a link with Crystal Palace, give us a call and tell us what you think. Because obviously, it may well end up that there's still time to get out of it. Am I right? They may go to Cass and it might...
There's even a bigger irony. I mean, David Blitzer owns Bromby, and they're going to go in the European Conference League, and that's not going to be challenged.
At the moment, as it stands, as we all know, Crystal Palace are looking at playing Europa League conference football next season, and not in the Europa League. Are you as devastated as Steve Parish is saying you are? Or do you hold Steve Parish and the rest of them there to account? It's on them. They sat in their hands, they took a risk, and it backfired.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.